at large would measure success by going to university and getting a first, for example, but not doing an apprentice or different forms of higher education. So that expectation is put on young people quite a lot, and families look at them putting that expectation on young people. We've got to get to that stage where by doing an apprentice is a measure of success, by doing other forms of higher education which is suited to that person, for them being on the course that is best suited to them, not just at the institution which is recognised in terms of historic prestige, rather than the institution which is best for them. And the example I'll give here is myself. Didn't do well in my GCSEs, didn't do well in my A-levels, and I didn't do well in my degree. And that's because I didn't learn by reading books or being focused in those books, but by going to university and in terms of transferable skills. I got involved in my societies, I got involved as a course rep, but I start learning by being involved. And there's a Chinese proverb, if you tell me I forget, if you show me I remember, but if you involve me I understand. And that's generally how I learned, by being involved. And I think a lot of students now learn that way as well because of certain backgrounds that they're from. And again, putting into perspective, not good at my GCSEs, not good at my A-levels, even though my mum invested all her money from her wedding, her jewellery money, to put me through education, and didn't do well in my degree, but now I'm one of the most powerful people in the country sitting on a panel with Alan Milburn. It shows what the measure of success could be and how bad the education system is.
He's very kind.
Is there a will?
Yes.
Is there a will?
Yeah.
Well, I think Alan's absolutely right. It needs to be a cultural change. I mean, I think not all universities by any means. I mean, a lot of access universities are absolutely clear in their mission, access to WP, and doing a fantastic job, and often doing that job with local colleges. And of course, I think in that mix, we shouldn't underestimate the WP work the local colleges do in terms of higher education, in further education. But I actually see that there are some still medieval structures in our society, and one of them is part of those medieval structures are actually some universities. And I think culturally they just have to join the 21st century and realise, as Alan said, that this is actually should be a core mission for them. They're not outside society, they are part of our society, and part of their role should be addressing issues of social mobility.
Okay, thank you very much. Move on to another question. I've got a question here. It says, who will champion progression, I presume to achieve, in the new widening participation framework? So I think this is a reference to the white paper where it talks about the challenge to create a new framework for widening participation and fair access. Nick?
Yeah, if I concentrate on the champion bit, if you like, and as John is aware, I think, you know, from my perspective, from the college's perspective, we haven't always been as central to this debate as perhaps we should have been, and we actually do have a big role here, both in terms of students progressing into higher education and, of course, providing higher education ourselves. But for me, actually, this conference, in terms of who will be the champion will be people in this room, and it will be collaboration. And I think if you look at the list on the conference agenda of who are supporting this conference, that gives you an indication that there is mass support for widening participation and improved access within the education community from primary up to university and beyond level. And in fact, we do have that movement there. It's been built up probably over 30, 35 years. We have a lot to be proud of, but we've moved from the position where it's a few, whereas I think we're in the majority. The organisations are there. We just have to lobby appropriately, put our arguments. We have the evidence base, and I think we have the moral arguments as well.
Thank you, Alan.
Well, look, I think it's... I think in terms of the championing role, it's the job of every university. And, you know, all universities nowadays are, because many want to, some feel as if they have to, but for a variety of motives, all universities nowadays put often considerable effort into widening participation. As I was saying in my speech, I think it's unfortunate that some of the infrastructure has disappeared around aim higher, but there's an opportunity to create something here as well, I think. I think, as Nick was saying, it's very, very important to recognise one thing, which is that this is an agenda that is not going to go away. You know? there is wind in the sails of this agenda. Now, you might think that the breeze is blowing in contrary directions sometimes. So you look at a policy like AAB, for example, and you might take the view that AAB is pushing and indeed financially incentivizing universities in one direction, and exhortation, i.e. widen participation and do more fair access, is pointing in another direction. And the self-evident danger is that at a time of fiscal constraint, you know, if you like, economics beats politics. However, it is very interesting for me the way in which this whole agenda has now become, and I think genuinely so, it has become an issue of cross-party, broadly consensual agreement. You know, the Conservative Party, the Liberal Democrats, the Labour Party, broadly all want to see the same thing happening. So that is what I call progress. You know, when progressive ideas and policies become the preserve, not of one party, but they become the preserve of many political parties, that is actually a very, very good thing. So, you know, all the work that you guys have been doing and the work this organisation has been doing for very, very many years, you are where the action is. So there is a real opportunity, in my view, to shape this in a really positive way and drive it forward. Now, of course, there's always an issue to do with government and public policy to ensure that you get public policy aligned with what universities want to do and what society expects of universities. And so, you know, I can try to help that a little bit, maybe in the stuff that I do with my reports and so on and so forth. But I genuinely believe, as Nick says, that there's an opportunity to do some real good here and make a real difference. And I'm going to have to go, but I just wanted what I should have said at the outset of my speech, which I didn't say, is to thank you very much for all the work that you do, because it's making a difference to many people's lives. And I actually think that, as I say, there's a real chance that we can do even more in the years to come. So thank you very much indeed.
From my point of view, I've been involved in the student movement in terms of within NUS for about 3 years now, and the issue's always been discussed, and it's going over the issues over and over again. I think Vice Chancellors need to show a lot more leadership on the issue now, not just talk about it, but actually embed it in everything that they're doing. The same with myself and student unions. We can't just talk about it anymore, we have to embed it in everything that we're doing, and there's a big push in terms of, I personally think that students can become part of the process in terms of the champions, in terms of widening participation. When AIM hire part of their research, the thing that comes back the most, that students or potential students remember the most, is when they've had contact with students. And I think Student Union have a big role to play now to go out and do outreach work. One, because I have no confidence in the government, if I'm truthful, on this issue. But secondly, I think student unions have a huge role to play, where, say, the football team within student union is going out into the communities and playing with the local kids. And over time, they build that relationship where they can open up with them, bring them onto campus, not just tourism, WP, which seems to be happening quite a lot, where they come into campus and then they're off, but actually more stuff which is embedded while they're at university, getting involved in the student union newspaper, for example, and we're piloting 20 student unions this year which are getting involved in these activities, so they're embedding it in everything that they're doing. And there's a student union evaluation initiative, which is like the QAA of student unions, which now NUS owns. And one of the things which I'm looking to do is embed WP within that framework, so every single student union has to embed it in everything that they're doing as well.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Not that there's much left for me to say now, but it's good. I too believe it's an opportunity. Universities UK is very keen to work with you. I do think you're the champions, but I think Universities UK also has a role. We have a role to work with you to make sure that the new policy framework can and does promote social mobility and doesn't work against it. There are tensions in that policy framework. Nicola alluded to some of those. You've probably talked about some of those in your workshops. You need to work more collaboratively, but also you're in a very competitive situation now. So how can we do that? How can we make sure that the areas where demand does fall, we know, we monitor it carefully, and we can go back to government and say, this, for example, maybe the AAB policy will have a detrimental impact on some groups, and we can go back and say, look, this is happening. For example, Universities UK is calling for stability for 2013-14. We have advocated we don't want the government to deregulate any further. Let's have 1 year of stability when we can actually monitor and see what's going to happen. So I think we have a role too. It would be useful for you to keep in touch with the UK where you think there are issues, so that we can then go back to BIS and we can say this is not helping the actual overall policy framework, which the government does want. And I agree that's where we have the opportunity now. The government does generally want to make progress in social mobility. They genuinely believe, I think, that universities can be vehicles of social mobility, but we need to make sure that that framework is right. And we are getting policy, we are getting evidence-based policy and not policy-based evidence.
Thank you. Okay. Now, I think what we'll do is we'll take one more question, and then I want to give you an opportunity from the floor to raise any final questions if you want before we'll come to the conclusion remarks. So, apologies if your question didn't get through. Putting it down to bad sharing on my part, please. But we'll take one more question, then I'll open up to the floor. So, the final question is, how can institutions promote widening participation and student support, including personal tutoring, when reward and recognition of academic staff is so strongly linked to research?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. This is one you didn't have advance notice of. How can institutions promote widening participation and student support, including personal tutoring, when reward and recognition for academic staff is strongly linked to research? In other words, how do you incentivise and recognise the contribution that staff make to widening participation?
It's everything that I prefer in terms of being embedded in everything that we're doing, not just in terms of contextual data and getting into university, but being embedded in everything that the institutions do themselves. A big piece of research that NUS is hoping to do this year is around retention and pounding the pocket, so money in terms of the student's pocket rather than fee waivers, and the impact that that will have while they're at the institution, so that will help. A single parent with 3 children, a lot more to work on the children, but still be able to be at university. But in terms of teaching recognition, I think a lot more needs to be done away from the research, but looking at the teaching quality and embedding the student voice within that. So NUS is doing, with the Higher Education Academy, projects around student-led teaching awards, which is focusing on the work that lecturers are doing in terms of enhancing teaching quality away from research, but recognising the work that they're doing. And we're hoping within this, the criteria we get back from students will be around the relationship with the tutor, how they've helped different students from different backgrounds feel part of that course. Little things like liberating the curriculum, a project that we've launched in terms of NUS did some research called the Race for Equality Report, and it looked at the types of students which are dropping out of university, and a lot of them said that they can't connect with the course or what they're being taught with. So the example I'll give here is that when I was studying, I studied biology and chemistry, and I absolutely hated it. But if I knew that there was a dude called Ibn al-Haytham who invented how the eye works, he was one of the founders of science, I probably would have connected with that course a lot more and stayed within that course because there was a common interest there based on my background. If I knew that it was a Muslim woman who was one of the first founders of the concept of a university, that would answer a lot of stereotypes in society today. So we're looking at different ways in terms of recognising teaching quality, but how these things around WP indirectly can attract the different students from different backgrounds.
Okay, thank you. Fiona?
I think one of the problems we have is that we saw that in the white paper for those of us in England. The white paper was very much around splitting between teaching and research, seeing these as 2 different functions as completely discrete functions, which of course they're not. They interact and they relate, and until we can get over that, we need to make a cultural change here. We need to make sure that that gets recognised, and one of our concerns we raised back to government was about you can't think of these in isolation. And another point I would say is that we need to bring these the recognition within our staff induction, our award and recognition schemes, the importance of the teaching in what we do.
Thank you.
Yeah, just briefly, I think both the previous speakers indicated that there are rewards, recognition and incentives for teaching now, and also obviously for research. I wonder if some universities, maybe they're already there, I don't know, looking at Southampton, Solent might have something in this area, that there'll be an award recognition for those staff who are involved in WP roles, and possibly both teaching and WP roles, that there could be some awards and recognition for that work. If WP is central, and it is for many access universities, then it seems to me that the staff who are involved in that work ought to get due recognition And I think it was quite significant that Alan alluded to some of the work in America, where WP practitioners and outreach practitioners are held in much higher esteem, possibly, than they are in UK and Europe. So possibly some kind of recognition scheme for those involved in working with WP students, tutoring and student support.
Thank you, Nick. Right, I said I would rather things to use as the last points and comments and questions. We don't want to hold it be able to train if you want to ask that question. So now's an opportunity to ask that question or make a comment. Who'd like to do that? Just say who you are, where you're from, please.
Ross Renton from the University of Hertfordshire. The question I have is on the National Scholarship Programme. And speaking to both potential applicants, the parents, it's not having the effect desired, they don't understand it, in fact, what they achieve don't understand it. And a really simple one, has it failed before it's even started, and what can we do here to break it back or to get some changes?
Just a quick response, please.
Very quickly, the HEFKI have recruited a team to evaluate it. You're absolutely right. We have concerns. I think NUS share concerns about it. It's not basically incentivising going to university, progressing to university, which is exactly what it's supposed to do. So there is room for change. The working group and the steering group, which is chaired by the Minister in terms of further developing this group, is still in existence. We are meeting, and the feedback that we get from you will be very important in terms of evaluating it and taking it forward. It's not the end. You know, this is only the beginning, I would say.
I think it was described by a senior civil servant as a dog's breakfast. It's not an incentive scheme, it's a bloody mess. And I think I'm right in saying that ourselves, AOC and NUS, Usman will probably correct me, that we would both like the scheme to be put in the hands of schools and colleges where it is the most appropriate place for it to be.
Yeah, definitely. It's not national, it's not a scholarship, and it's pretty much not a programme. It's failed in everything that it pretty much does. It's 100% a dead weight. It doesn't incentivise students going to university at all, so it pretty much has failed. I don't see it helping students from poor backgrounds in any way in incentivising them going to university.
Another question or comment?
The National Student Services Organisation. I'd like to pick up on some of the comments made about who will champion the progress in widening participation. I almost wonder whether it's too simplistic to say that people in this room and universities, I would worry greatly that people in this room weren't already championing widening participation. But if that championing message isn't reaching people, should we be trying to engage other audiences, or are there other things that we could or should be doing?
Difficult question. I don't think I was in my answer. I was just looking at the agenda and looked at the groups that are involved. I mean, I think if you look at the spread from NIACE to Universities UK, etc. I mean, I think that is a very important lobby. But I take on board what you're saying in terms of that to make what is already a big lobby possibly an even more powerful and a more mass lobby. It may be that we do need to be involving other structures in our civil society, and I suppose the ones that come to mind are probably parts of the trades union movement who would be very sympathetic to this. That's one example I can give quickly, but others I'm sure if I had a little bit of reflection, because I think this is a mass movement, because governments are not in the game as they were in the post-war period, if you like, or putting in structures in place in terms of redistribution. It is a bit of a one-club system in terms of addressing redistribution, and one of those clubs is education. So I do think it's an important topic across party, and I think Alan was right, is that the parties now are in agreement with that, but there's a long way from them doing that and actually putting in appropriate places, appropriate policies that work. So I think you're right, we probably need to broaden it out, and I think there are other organisations within our society that would be sympathetic to building even a bigger platform and organisation to put forward these arguments.